The Danube cut through Bratislava like a sheet of hammered pewter, catching the long crimson smear of the setting sun. Above the river, the castle ramparts sharpened themselves against the sky, black-toothed silhouettes from every angle. Locals said the walls never looked heavier than they did before an eclipse. Tourists claimed it was mist, tricks of evening light, yet old women selling gingerbread in the market swore that on nights when the moon grew dark, the castle's shadow dropped from the hill like a cloak and crawled across the streets, all stone, no sunlight, alive enough to whisper. Most laughed it off as folklore between sips of mulled wine, but the legend had rules, catalogued in brittle parish records and confirmed in footnotes nobody read. Every 4 centuries, when a perfect umbral eclipse hung above the Carpathians, the shadows did more than wander. They remembered the unfinished work of swords and torches, and they tried to complete it. Lucia Markovichova wanted none of that. She wanted photographs, long exposures of moonlight glazing slate roofs, a portfolio to push her beyond wedding gigs and corporate headshots. She arrived 2 days before the eclipse, rented a tiny flat near Kapuscinska Street, and carried her cameras as carefully as if they were infants. On her second evening, she climbed to the promenade beneath Bratislava Castle, framed the city's neon glow against twilight, and thought, "This is enough." Yet the more she shot, the more her mind gnawed at a single sentence she'd overheard on the train from Vienna. An elderly man in a bowler hat had leaned toward his companion. "The eclipse turns the bastion's shadow solid. Keep away from glass." Glass? Lucia, being Lucia, felt her fingers itch for a lens. In an antique shop along Venturska, crammed between tin toy soldiers and Soviet enamel pins, she found one. A 19th-century brass-barreled lens wrapped in brown velvet. The shopkeeper, a gold-ringed patriarch named Mr. Stepan, lifted it with 2 hands. Obsidian shards glimmered inside the aperture like scales on a dark fish. "You are a photographer," he said, eyes narrowed. "This lens was ground from volcanic glass, quarried at Sitno, where witches met kings. It keeps what it sees." She laughed, charmed by the patter, and bought it with the last of her stipend. That evening she mounted it to her mirrorless body, balanced the rig on her tripod, and pointed it toward the castle for a test shot. The LCD screen showed nothing but an underexposed smear. She shrugged. Older optics always needed coaxing. The eclipse arrived the following night, a wolf-hued disk chewing through the moon. Crowds clustered near the river, firing phone cameras at the sky. Lucia hiked the hill to the grassy courtyard just outside the castle's massive iron gate. She counted the seconds until totality, adjusted ISO, checked her histogram like a priest fingering rosary beads. The world dimmed into bruised violet. Floodlights lining the walls clicked off, as arranged by the city to honor the event. Darkness, sudden and complete, rolled over the parapets and congealed on the ground. Through the viewfinder, she watched the castle's outline dip and stretch as though someone had tugged on its fabric. The shadows detached, sliding down the ramp as a liquid membrane. Gooseflesh rippled under Lucia's coat. Her rational mind wrote furious memos: contrast, dynamic range, optical illusion, while another voice, older and quieter, told her to run. She did not. She pressed the shutter. The click cracked through the courtyard like a starter's pistol. On the screen, the silhouette hardened into textured onyx. A second shadow peeled from the first, long and narrow, helmeted. A third followed, hefting the suggestion of a pike. Each time she tripped the shutter, the camera captured a new figure, and in the same motion seemed to lift it from the two-dimensional dark into breathing depth. She was building a regiment out of negative space. When she lowered the camera, the figures remained, men, without faces, lacquer dirt, yet reflecting the faintest ember of distant street lamps along their armor. They stepped across cobblestones without sound, only the scrape of non-existent metal on stone. A theater of mimed violence. Lucia backed away, clutching the tripod like a spear. 40 paces below, a guided tour of drunk Australians cheered at the Eclipse, oblivious. The first armoured shadow turned toward her, its visor a slice of emptiness. Words condensed in the air, brittle as ice. "Where is Sigismund?" Another voice behind it answered. "The king fled. The city still stands." A third. "Then we breach the walls tonight." Glacial terror fought professional curiosity inside Lucia. Terror wanted her to sprint down the hill until she smashed into civilization. Curiosity wanted to keep shooting, to document what no lens had ever seen. Curiosity won 2 more frames. Each burst birthed additional warriors, crossbowmen, pikemen, a standard-bearer carrying a banner whose ripples were tatters of deeper shade. With every photograph, the courtyard grew more crowded and the air colder. Lucia's breath emerged as white threads. Finally, she found enough sense to yank the battery free. The screen went black. The knights, unfortunately, did not. They marched past her, ignoring flesh for stone. Their destination was clear. The old city below, whose pastel facades now looked like parchment begging for fire. Lucia broke from her paralysis and ran parallel to them, cutting down narrow steps to intercept. "Stop!" she shouted, because sometimes a silly word is all a person has. The standard-bearer pivoted. A plume of darkness streamed from where a feather should be. "Bind her," he said. Hands darker than moonless water closed around Lucia's wrists, cold, real. She kicked, instinctually snapping more shots with her free hand. With each flash, the grasp softened. Photons, she realized, unstitched their cohesion. She swung her camera in a wide arc, capturing the grasping fingers at point blank. They evaporated into greasy smoke. She fled into a side street, memory card throbbing with impossible images. Her flat was too far. She needed knowledge. Professor Milan Politsega, a historian who'd once lectured at her university, lived nearby in a ramshackle apartment over a craft beer bar. Half the student body claimed he dabbled in occult cartography. He'd even published a monograph on persistent ombre in Central European siege lore. Lucia sprinted, the world lit only by coppery eclipse gloom. She banged on his door, shouting her name. Milan answered in a crocheted sweater and wool socks, eyes red from reading. "Dear girl, it's nearly midnight. I released warriors," she panted, holding up the brass lens. "They're shadows from the castle. They're headed for the old walls." The historian's face blanched. He pulled her inside, bolted the door, and rummaged through shelves stacked with vellum maps. "The last full umbral event was 1419, he said, voice threading panic with awe. Sigismund of Luxembourg held Bratislava against a Hussite band. Legends claim the Hussites called on astral darkness to assault the ramparts. The eclipse entered before they breached, trapping their conjured forms inside the castle's shadow. You, my dear, have just pardoned them. He examined the lens beneath a green banker's lamp. Obsidian veins pulsed inside like frost lines. "Sit-no glass," he whispered. "Old glass eats light. That's why your camera animated them. Each exposure froze their essence outside the umbra, giving them durability. To reverse it, we must trap them back into the same medium, but under direct light, not absence." "Sunrise," Lucio said. "Exactly. But dawn is an hour away, and they'll raise half the city before then." He collected a silver-edged mirror, a jar of lamp black, and a handheld flash. "We must herd them to an open space where the first rays strike clean." Lucia thought of the Snap Bridge locals called it UFO Bridge, its saucer restaurant perched above the Danube. Eastern light speared straight through its span at daybreak. "We steer them onto the bridge," she proposed. "Then we use this lens like a cage." They hurried into the street. The city sounded wrong. No traffic, no chatter, just the low drone of wind through abandoned alleys. People had retreated indoors to watch live streams of the eclipse. None saw what stalked the cobblestones. But Lucia and Milan did. Shadow knights formed a column along Michalska Street, deliberate as a piston. Crossbows lifted toward every medieval archway. Arrows made of nothing flew. Wherever they struck, lanterns shattered, deepening the dark for others to manifest. A relay loop of annihilation. Lucia toggled her camera to burst mode, firing at the lead archer. Flash popped. The figure staggered. She kept shooting until the night imploded into soot. Others turned, raising pikes. Milan swung the mirror, catching the moon's copper glint and reflecting it into their helms. They recoiled, confused. "They navigate by negation," he gasped. "Give them unfocused light to blind them." They retreated toward the river, fighting a rearguard action of photons. Lucia's battery indicator bled red. She slapped in a spare. "Almost to the embankment," she promised herself. At the bridge ramp, the city reasserted its geometry. Sodium red streetlights, graffiti-tagged pillars. A bus stop abandoned mid-route. Yet even here the Eclipse held dominion. The moon was still a coin of rust in an iron sky. The knights fanned out, sniffing the wind like wolves. The Captain Talla, shoulders ringed by what looked like cinders, spotted the suspension cables. "Passage," he declared. "Break the arch." Two squads started across the bridge, boots silent but reverberations trembling through steel. Cars parked along the span quivered as if in earthquake. Lucia and Milan dashed ahead, reaching the midpoint beneath the UFO's saucer. Milan smeared lampblack in a circle, citing Latin that tasted of funerals. Lucia felt the air hum inside the ring. "Set the lens on the ground," he commanded. She obeyed. Obsidian glowed. The captain arrived, his standard an inkwell tornado. "Sigismund is dust," he barked across the distance. "Bratislava's crown falls tonight." Lucia lifted her camera, framing him against the distant halo of street lamps on the Petrozelka side. She pressed the shutter. The flash spat pure white. The captain staggered but did not crumble. "Obdurate," Milan hissed. "He's fused with the original conjuration. We need solar spectrum." The horizon behind the castle pulsed silver. Dawn was hemorrhaging through the eclipse's final minutes. The Earth's shadow slid away from the moon, revealing slivers of bone-white disk. Sunlight, not yet direct, crept under the stratosphere, turning river mist into flying fish of gold. The knights froze, sensing betrayal from the sky. "Now!" Milan shouted. Lucia scooped the lens, aimed it backward like a telescope, and aligned it with the emerging light. Obsidian facets caught the first ray. A refraction column burst forward, a spotlight forged from dawn, passing through lens glass before spraying over the bridge in a glittering cone. Every knight within the beam convulsed, their armor crackling like celluloid wrapped in flame. Pieces snapped off and whirled inside the cone, sucked toward the lens mouth, shrinking into miniature silhouettes that streaked into the glass and stuck there, frantic as insects trapped in amber. The captain roared. He drove a spectral sword into the pavement, cracking asphalt. Lucien kept the beam on him, wrists buckling under vibration. "Halt!" He lunged, breaking half his body free from the light. Obsidian shards within the lens squirmed under strain. Nilam leapt forward, mirror raised high. He caught a second shard of sunrise and redirected it into the captain's exposed flank. The Shadow Knight screamed, a sound like coal exploding in fire. In one implosive rush, his form shattered and drained into the lens, swirling among the imprisoned multitude. Lucia's hands blistered, swung the lens downward and smashed it against the concrete railing. Obsidian detonated into star-like shards that fizzled before touching ground. The captured knights winked out with them, erased from earthly registry. A gust swept the bridge, smelling of iron and burnt parchment. The moon climbed, bright and round, Eclipse exhausted. Morning claimed the river. Traffic signals blinked green, birds negotiated the thermal. Lucia collapsed, cradled by Milan's arm. She half expected crowds to flood the bridge, demanding explanations about the thunder and vacuum bangs. But the city woke slowly. Ignorant, saved without knowing it needed saving. Police sirens eventually wailed toward reports of strange explosions near the castle and freak light shows on the bridge. Lucia gave statements heavy on electrical malfunctions, light on spectral sieges. Officers accepted them with bureaucratic fatigue. They never asked about the camera. Back at Milan's flat, Lucia poured tea over trembling fingers. She removed the memory card, slotting it into her laptop. Thumbnails lined the screen, dozens of frames depicting void-faced soldiers. She hovered over the delete key. "If I erase them, is that safe?" she asked. Milan scratched his beard. Digital light has no mass, yet shadows are patient. Who can say whether a pixel is truly incorporeal? She highlighted all but one photo, the very first she'd shot before she'd understood anything. In it, the castle's shadow still clung to wall and ground, merely bulging. A single eye of nothingness gazed from the forming helm. Curiosity again overruled fear. She left that image untouched. A reminder, perhaps, or a warning to future pixels. Weeks later, international news ran a brief about unexpected surface cracks on the Snip Bridge attributed to thermal expansion anomalies during the eclipse. Locals tut-tutted and moved on. Tourists returned, photographing the saucer restaurant, the river, the looming castle. One evening, Lucia found herself back at the hill by habit. Sunset brushed the ramparts rose and gold. She lifted her regular lens, framing silhouettes for an ordinary skyline shot, and noted how beautiful the shadow looked, how it lay obediently flat against grass and wall. As she pressed the shutter, she could almost swear that, for a heartbeat, the shadow's edge trembled in recognition, as if sniffing for obsidian. She lowered the camera and walked away. Behind her, the castle's silhouette remained perfectly still, waiting, perhaps 4 more centuries for the moon to grow hungry again.